So, this is, of course, the legislative chamber. It's kind of what it would have to be. There are actually many rooms in the building where politicians meet to debate issues of the day, to draft legislation. But this is the main one. This is where all bills are introduced, where they're read, debated, voted on, and passed or struck down. This is where the majority of the debates occur, the question period, for example. And just fundamentally speaking, this is where we can fit everybody, although that's up for question. I'll be talking about that in a second. Now, each desk here is for an MLA, a member of the Legislative Assembly. And when they sit here together, they are known as the Legislative Assembly itself. And they are the legislators, and they have assembled. So the nomenclature all makes a certain amount of sense, although really it depends on what province you are in Canada as to what they call them. Now, each MLA in BC represents about 50,000 voting citizens. That's how we try to work it. It never works out perfectly because, of course, you're dealing with geography as well as population, but that's how they try to work it. And we've got it divided up in here. So on the left, we have our majority party. They're the BC Liberals. They're a right-wing or small c conservative party for BC. On the other side, we have the NDP, the New Democratic Party. They're our left-wing party for BC. We also have 3 independent members, members who aren't aligned with either of the parties, and they sit with the opposition. Now, I should mention for the Liberals, having the Liberals as a right-wing party is confusing for both Americans and Canadians. Canadians are accustomed to, well, Americans are accustomed to Liberals being almost a derogatory term for quite left-leaning individuals. Damn dirty hippies, for example. That was disrespectful. Just completely forget that I said that. In Canada, it's a very different situation because the Liberals have always been a very center of the road party. They've been very successful on the federal level, for example, because they can swing left or swing right whenever they need to. And so they've historically been the most successful party on our federal level. Now, in BC, a quite different situation occurred. In the late 1980s, early 1990s, our Conservative Party, the Social Credit Party, folded up shop. And the Liberal Party ended up inheriting a number of their younger politicians and swung quite right to fill in that void of power. And they've been very successful in that area ever since. And so for the past, well, about 20 years or so, they've been very successful in that sort of niche. But that means that the BC Liberals in BC are quite a bit more right-wing and are often at loggerheads with the other Liberals in Canada. Now, going back to the chamber itself, you can see we've got the big chair right there. That's the throne chair. That's not for the Premier. The Premier, of course, sits with her party. She sits about 5 in from the back in that front row, surrounded by her cabinet. The person that sits in the big chair is for the Speaker of the House. He's an MLA who was elected by all of the other MLAs to run the chamber. So it's basically his job to act as a referee, to make sure that everybody follows the rules, that they behave themselves, and that everybody follows the set-out parliamentary procedure and the agendas that they've set out for that day. Now, the person who tells him what the rules are is the clerk of the House. It's a very, very important role within the Parliament. The clerk sits at that smaller table right there, surrounded by 2 aides. And it's his job basically to know everything there is to know about parliamentary procedure, and what's more, to navigate the absolute maze of precedents that have been set up for over a century by all of the provinces and by the 51 countries of the Commonwealth. So it's a very, very difficult job, very demanding job. When you get a clerk that's good at his job, you tend to keep them around. For example, our former clerk retired about 5 months ago. His name was George McMinn. He served in this chamber for over 52 years. He was 83 years old when he retired. He was the longest serving clerk in the history of the Commonwealth. Absolutely remarkable. Now, we follow the Westminster system in this chamber, or the Westminster model, very common paradigm of Parliament all around the world, specifically in the Commonwealth countries, but it's branched out from there. It's the one that we inherit from England, and it's very much steeped in the historical realities of English Parliament. For example, the fact that they're facing each other like this, with the Speaker in the middle, dates back to the fact that the very earliest parliaments in England were held in a converted Anglican cathedral. And in the high Anglican cathedrals at that point, that's how they oriented the pews that were closest to the altar. It was facing each other, as opposed to the much more theatre seating that a lot of us are accustomed to. The fact that the Speaker was sitting in the middle was because he was sitting on the priest's chair. The fact that when the MLAs enter the chamber they have to bow to the Speaker was because that priest's chair was sitting right beside the tabernacle originally, and they had to, in high Anglican and Catholic cathedrals, you have to bow to the tabernacle whenever you enter into the room. So all of these things have, of course, been secularized over the years. They've become tradition. For example, when they bow, when they enter into the chamber nowadays, they're bowing to the authority of the Queen as represented by the Speaker. Now there's one tradition that we're actually breaking in this chamber, and it has to do with the curve of the desk. You'll notice there is a curve. It's not an aesthetic choice, although it does look quite nice. It's a practical choice. We put that in there because the room is way too small. It was created by Rattenbury to comfortably seat about 40 to 45 MLAs. They had 33 when they moved in, so there was a bit of room to expand, but the problem is that we now have 85 MLAs, which is entirely too many for the chamber. It's very, very crowded in there. And so we had to put the curve of the desks just to fit everybody in, but it breaks a very old tradition that says that this main aisle right there is supposed to be uniformly straight and 2 sword lengths wide all the way down. And the reason for that is exactly as it sounds. When they first set up their parliament in England, they set it up at a time when people still habitually carried swords. It wasn't so much to do battle in the street, shall we say. We're not going back that far into their history. It was much more to indicate rank and stature within society, and because of that, they were not asked to take them off when they entered into the chamber. And that would have been fine and dandy, except for the very earliest debates in the English Parliament, we're going back about 800 years, were very, very rowdy and very raucous. And there were actually historical cases of fistfights breaking out among the politicians, which is absurd to us now, but was a historical reality at the time. And they were desperately afraid that somebody was going to remember that they had a 4-foot-long blade strapped to their hip, and that somebody was going to become quite seriously injured. And so they decided, and they're trying to be very pragmatic about it, they decided that 2 sword lengths, if you think about it, there's not a lot of room to space yourself out if you're having a proper duel. And if somebody's coming at you with a sword, there's not a lot of room to get out of the way. So they thought that would be a deterrent. It would be a little bit too close. But the nice thing is, if you're having a fist fight, there's just enough room that they can break them up. So it was going to be sort of in that happy medium range. Now, of course, this is passed into tradition. It's long outlived its usefulness as an actual rule. Certainly, there's never been a physical altercation in here, and you're definitely not allowed to bring a sword or any other weapon to work anymore. It's considered a little bit passé. So, it's really outlived its usefulness, but it's a tradition that has stuck around. In fact, of the very many parliaments all around the world, hundreds of them that follow the Westminster system, this is one of only a handful that has actually broken that tradition by putting a curve in the desks. Any questions about any of that? No? All right, so let's head downstairs then, if you want to follow me. We're going to head down to the reception hall.